us from the Netherlands, and a very good afternoon to our colleagues here in Thailand and our colleague in Jakarta. My name is Simon Grimley. I work here at NSTDA, the sign behind me. I work with the International Cooperation Division, where we work on strengthening ties between Thailand and research institutes, universities, etc. in Europe. I'd like to welcome you to this information session on Dutch research funding and cooperation opportunities, which we're co-organizing with Nuffic Neso and Erasmus ASEAN, and this is being done under the umbrella of the European Research and Innovation Days ASEAN. I'll talk a bit more about those later. We are very fortunate today to have with us some excellent presenters who will share information on research funding and cooperation opportunities available to you here in Thailand. And I encourage you to take full advantage of the session today. And by that I mean ask lots of questions. We don't always get these same people or these people in the same room at the same time. So please don't be shy. Type away, send us your questions, and we'll do our best to answer these as we go along. And those that we can't answer, we will be recording this session, and we will come back to you with answers that we maybe didn't get to during this afternoon. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Peter van Tuijl, who is Director of Nuffic Neso, Netherlands Education Support Office in Indonesia. He also oversees the work of Nuffic in Southeast Asia, so he has a good knowledge of not just Indonesia, but the region, and he will share with you sort of opportunities for research cooperation between Thailand and the Netherlands. Peter is joining us today from Jakarta, where the Nuffic Neso head office is located. So thank you, Peter, for joining us, and I give the floor to you. Peter?
Thank you, Simon. Thank you so much for inviting us this afternoon to share some more information about research opportunities and opportunities for collaboration between the Netherlands and Thailand. Very happy also to be joined by Professor Holzhacker and Siriwan in Bangkok University. I'll give some more general information about research in the Netherlands and funding opportunities. Professor Holzhacker will go a bit more into what it takes to prepare a PhD proposal in the Dutch context. And Siri, of course, can share some of her experiences as a researcher. She obtained her PhD from Erasmus University in Rotterdam. So we hope that trio will give you different angles on the topic. And then, of course, we will be very happy to respond to your questions. Next slide, please. So why would you go to the Netherlands to work and do research? Well, there's a host of reasons for it. And the main is that the Netherlands is a hub for research and innovation. The quality of the higher education institutions is high. You will find them high up in all of the rankings. There's a lot of research and development going on, incentivized by government, but certainly also by the private sector. And you see a lot of that research flipping over into a flourishing startup ecosystem. So you're in the middle of a world-class talent pool. Next slide, please. Now, to give you some sense of public sector research institutions in the Netherlands, here you can see that a lot of them are corporate sectors. But there is 14 research universities. Professor Holzhacker is from Groningen, which is one of those 14. There are 6 institutions run by the Netherlands organization that funds scientific research on behalf of the Ministry of Education, NWO. There is 18 distinct research institutions under the Royal Netherlands Academy for Science. There is 5 larger technological institutions and 14 smaller ones on the Technology and Innovation Agency. There's also a number of state-owned research and advisory centers. So that's what I meant by there's a large ecosystem. And of course, I should also emphasize that what will ease you coming into the Netherlands, and Professor Holzhacker can testify to that, is that the Netherlands within the European Union is the country where most people speak English. And actually a lot of our education is taught in English. So you will have no problem going around in the Netherlands in your individual life, but also not in your academic life, as long as your English is of a sufficient level. Next slide, please. Now, research funding via Dutch universities is supported by 3 flows of money. The first flow of money is direct government funding to universities. This is the largest. So the government supports universities to fund research. And we'll come back to that, how you can tap into that. The second flow is more indirectly via some of the institutes that I was already mentioning. The Organization of Scientific Research, NWO is the Dutch abbreviation, of course. The Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, KNAW, they fund specific research projects for which most of the time you can tender with your institution or in collaboration with Dutch institutions. There is also a third flow, sorry, of other funding via European frameworks and the Horizon 2020 program that some of you may have heard about. That's a very substantial program funded by the EU in support of research by EU institutions, often in collaboration with institutions in Southeast Asia. I believe Professor Holzhacker himself is involved in some projects funded by the EU in Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. So, what are key features of pursuing a PhD in the Netherlands? It usually takes 4 years as a minimum to conduct original research and to write your dissertation. What is quite specific for the Netherlands and different from many other countries is that a PhD is often not regarded as a study program, but it is considered as a job. You will be employed by the university where you do your PhD research. And as a consequence, also the nature of your visa is different. Most of the time, if you do a PhD in the Netherlands, you will have a work visa, not a student visa. And so that qualifies a bit how we look at a researcher. It's a serious job. It is not somebody set apart in some sort of silo of academic research. Academic research has to be relevant, so it is a job. This is offered in all of the research universities, and you can of course do that employed by the institution, by the university. You can do that also on the basis of scholarships, or people sometimes have funding by your employer. That is also possible. On the right side, you see already the 2 main researcher job boards. One is under Eurexis, already mentioned by Simon in his introduction, and the other one is from an organization called Academic Transfer. This presentation will be shared, so you don't need to write very quickly if you want to jot down all of the URLs. You will see them later on in the presentation if you're interested. Next slide, please. So this is the job board of Academic Transfer. Academic Transfer shares information about that first stream of funding that I was just talking about. all of the jobs offered by universities to do a PhD, to do research. So you can filter for what kind of theme you would be interested in, what kind of university even, and believe me, have a look if you're interested. There's really a lot of jobs out there. There's a lot of opportunities out there. Next slide, please. This is the Eurexis opening webpage, which does have links to some of the individual jobs, but also has links to opportunities of European funding. And so where you can try to conduct research more in the context of a larger project, probably in collaboration with others by participating in a tender opportunity, for example. So different opportunities you will find on the Eurexis website. Next slide, please. This is a brief overview of what the Netherlands Science Research Council, NWO, does. It collects money. You see different ministries on the left side. Major funding comes from the Ministry of Culture and Science, but also from Economic Affairs, from other ministries, or from other public sector or private organizations. And that is being flown, usually filtered via tender procedures that you can find on the NWO website, projects for specific calls for proposals, often also for Southeast Asia. Actually, very recently, NWO had a call for proposals on renewable energy for Southeast Asia. So we're looking increasingly also at Southeast Asia as a region to foster research collaboration. And the funding then goes to universities, it goes to the research institutions under NWO itself, or to other knowledge institutions. So this again is more institutional, but definitely interesting for you also as an individual researcher to see what kind of opportunities are there for funding. Next slide, please. This is the NWO website. Same story. I think it's pretty easy, searchable. Many opportunities. You can also look at the history of calls for proposals to get a sense of what is possible and what NWO is interested in to support. Next slide, please. KNAW, the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, they provide funding usually smaller size, travel grants, individual grants, research grants. Would like to start your research, or they do, for example, calls for proposals for new consortia that want to start collaboration together. I always find this an interesting way of looking at research funding. So definitely also, if you're a newcomer in this field, very worthwhile to have a look at this website because they may offer some opportunities that might be relevant for you. Next slide, please. This is their website. Again, easy searchable, all in English. Thematic angles, a history of calls for proposals, so you can get a sense of what the possibilities are, and they're quite extensive. Next slide, please. ZonNW is sort of the new kid on the block in this field. This is an agency that focuses on health and medical sciences, so particularly relevant, of course, because there's a lot of let's say, motivation at the moment and incentives also out of the political community to focus on COVID-19 and everything that has to do with it, public health. And this is a window of opportunity to look for grants and funding propositions under that heading. Next slide, please. This is the website. Again, same story as the others, all in English, easy searchable. I don't think this information is hard to get by. If you're interested in this field, medical and health, then have a look at this website and see if you can find something that appeals to you. Next slide, please. Last but not least, we have the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. This is money from the Ministry of Economic Affairs, so obviously more tied to the economic interest of the Dutch business. That is relevant in Southeast Asia. The Netherlands is the largest European investor in Southeast Asia and also in Thailand. A lot of that investment goes into agriculture. That will probably not surprise you because the Netherlands is the second largest agricultural exporter in the world. And the Dutch Enterprise Agency also has funding available to support investment, but of course, before investment, you often need to boost your knowledge about certain issue. There are specific questions that entrepreneurs or companies may have. And RVO, as is the Dutch abbreviation. Next slide, please. You can see they also have a website where you will find opportunities along these lines. Often a variety of things, more tied to the business interest. So again, another angle to look at potential funding and potential opportunities for collaboration. Next slide, please. Yeah, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Here you have our phone and contact numbers. Please feel free, also after this presentation and after this meeting today, if you have a question, our door is open for those questions, and we'd be happy to help you if you're interested to collaborate with the Netherlands, if you're interested to do a PhD in the Netherlands. Do not hesitate to get in touch with us. Thank you very much, Simon. Back to you.
Thank you, Peter, for that very comprehensive overview of the various funding agencies and sort of tools that you can use to find research funding opportunities. I picked up on a few points, Peter. One, which I think is often a concern for people traveling to Europe, is language. So English is widely spoken, so language shouldn't be a huge barrier for those that have a reasonable degree of or command of English. You also mentioned about the PhDs being a work visa. How difficult is it to get these visas? Because I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but this is often a frustration that researchers have here, is getting their visa, particularly student type visas. So could you comment on that, just sort of the relative ease of getting a PhD, that work visa?
Once you have a letter of acceptance by a Dutch institution or organization, it is relatively easy.
Okay.
And I should add to that, because we often get questions about that, also in this period of COVID-19, there are, of course, travel restrictions, and these travel restrictions, as we can see these days, again, they come and go. That is, travel restrictions are a bit of a moving target. But the Dutch government has made consistent efforts to exempt students and researchers from those travel restrictions. So if you have an agreement with a Dutch university to do a PhD, it is relatively easy to obtain that visa. There is a Dutch embassy in Bangkok, and they will be very much willing to help you.
Very good. Thanks, Peter. Maybe another question I had for you as well is, I recall that you used to run events, maybe this is mostly in Indonesia, but when you would bring out, or you would have represented a number of different universities from the Netherlands. And it was an opportunity for, prospective PhD candidates to meet, universities directly. And I guess obviously the formats had to change with COVID, but is there one of these coming up in the near future? When do you normally arrange those?
Not in the near future. We had one very recently for Indonesia, indeed.
Yeah.
On the 29th of October, and we do them in collaboration with Academic Transfer, which, as I try to explain, is sort of the main portal to these first flow of funding and all of these individual jobs. That was actually very successful. I just last week was debating with the head of the academic transfer where and when we will do this next year in Southeast Asia. We might do it regionally as well, not the least because, of course, we live in an online time, so it is more easy also to do it for different countries grouped together. So no dates yet, but keep an eye on the website of Academic Transfer, and then I'm sure we'll make it happen next year.
Thank you. And just a reminder to all those joining us, we will be, as Peter said, we'll be sharing the presentation, so don't panic about writing down the various web links and phone numbers, etc. So we'll share these after today's event. So now I'd like to introduce Professor Ronald Holzhacker, who is director of the Groningen Research Center for Southeast Asia and ASEAN. He'll share some practical information on finding hosts and partners in the Netherlands, particularly for your PhD or your research project. And before we started the session today, we were chatting, and Professor Holzhacker was talking about a couple of Thai PhD candidates that he's hosting at the moment. One of whom will be defending their thesis, I think, on Monday. So Professor Holzhacker knows Southeast Asia well, knows Thailand, has hosted a number of Thai PhDs. So a good person to have with us today. Over to you, Professor Ronald Holzhacker.
Thank you very much, Simon. Good afternoon to all of you across Thailand. It's morning here in Groningen. You see the sun coming up behind me. My solar cells are just waking up this morning. You have a view kind of into my backyard. It reminds me of a time before the COVID crisis where I had about 25 people from Thammasat University here in my home for a nice Thai dinner. And so we had deans and professors and about 25 students. So we were also spread out into the garden. It was a nice sunny day here in Groningen. So our ASEAN Research Center is an interdisciplinary, interfaculty research center at the University of Groningen. Here you see our academic building, and in the center there is our aula. I always welcome my PhD candidates with lunch, and we first visit the aula where they will defend their PhD 4 years after starting. And that's what we are about to do with our PhD candidate within the Faculty of Spatial Sciences, Naeem Laney. And he wrote about flood risk in Bangkok, also comparative research with Semarang in Indonesia. So we very much encourage also comparative research. And he now is has a position in the political science department at Thammasat University. And the other PhD candidate that Simon and Peter just mentioned is my candidate, Stanati. Now he's working for the Minister of the Environment in Bangkok, and he wrote about human rights in ASEAN. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. This is just to let you know my name here, Ronald Holzhacker. You know, you see also in the next slide here, and in our logo is this bridge. We could go to the next slide, please. This is the longest bridge in Southeast Asia, and we use this to stress that we are interested in, you know, cross-disciplinary research, trying to bridge between the social sciences and the hard sciences, for example, but also bridging between countries, between Europe and Southeast Asia, but also within Southeast Asia. And so far, our center has had 22 PhD candidates from Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam so far. Okay, next slide, please. You know, one of the things we wanted to do today is really help you begin to think about how you begin to search for a good fit for you in the Netherlands to supervise your PhD experience. When you reach out to these universities and these centers, I think it's very important that you think about what are your own prior experiences. You know, yes, you've already done academic studies, but you've also now been involved in a job, you have life experiences. So don't forget that, you know, use that experiences and your reflections in your own life and the society around you. One of the things you need to do in a proposal is try to link your research topic within a wider disciplinary or transdisciplinary field and pick up on the current theoretical debates. Oftentimes, when I first see proposals, they are focused on a research topic, but it's unclear how the student is building from their previous study, what their bachelor and master's was focused on, and a PhD also needs to be grounded within an academic discipline and the kind of theoretical debates that are going on there. Next, I think it's important that you, in a research proposal, be very clear about what you think is new and innovative about your proposed research, both for science and society. So it's different than a master work. A master thesis can be interpreting and reinterpreting existing literature with perhaps some time for new research, but a PhD is a research project, 4 years of research and writing. So a PhD is about creating new knowledge. So it's important that you are upfront and write about that. That's important to the funding agency that you send your proposal to, and also for the Dutch university to evaluate your research. A very strong focus, especially the last 10 years in the Netherlands, is a more specific discussion about the societal impact of your research. For example, at the end of chapters on analyzing, I always tell my students, okay, now think about some, for example, policy implications of your research for different actors. What might we recommend to NGOs working in this area? What might we recommend to different levels of government, national government, provincial, local? When you're looking across the Dutch landscape at different universities, you know, identify professors that are currently researching and publishing in your field that match their role as a supervisor for you is very important. When I first receive applications, I think about different professors across the University of Groningen that I think would be a good fit. And then we discuss further the research with that professor. Peter earlier this afternoon talked about some Dutch scholarships and funding opportunities, and it's also important to think about the Thai national funding opportunities to study abroad. There was also a discussion about visas to come to the Netherlands. One of the things that makes the University of Groningen unique, it's a top 100 research university in the world. And one of the things we offer those students that come with a national scholarship from their own country, we top up that scholarship amount so that they make the same amount of money as a Dutch or European PhD candidate. And what that allows is the candidate to bring their spouse and their children into the Netherlands, because then they have sufficient income to show the Dutch immigration authorities. So many of my PhD candidates have their children in the schools in Groningen, and they seem to be quite happy there. Okay, next slide, please. This next slide was a really good suggestion from my colleague, Tim Svagster from the International Office. And he pointed out how important it is to be able to have different lengths of your research proposal. So, you know, it's important within a paragraph to be able to summarize what your research is about, and that helps graduate schools identify who potential supervisors would be for that research. So even before they read your longer 5, 6, 7-page document, it's good to have a good subject matter line for your email, and also a sort of paragraph before you have your attachment. Okay, next slide, please. Here is a suggestion on how to structure a research proposal. And if you also think about the journal articles that you have read as part of a perhaps master student, this is usually how journal articles in the social sciences and other fields are structured. And sometimes it might not be as explicit as this, but these are categories that I think will make for a very organized research proposal. And it also echoes then when we publish our research in journal articles. So it's important to, you know, first have a couple paragraphs introduction to your topic. My recommendation would be for one of these paragraphs to be focused on your topic, let's say applied to Thailand or Southeast Asia. But then the second paragraph or the other paragraph to show how that is related to theoretical debates in the literature. So right away, we realize why this is important to science and the discipline. Then it comes a paragraph that is your research question, perhaps also with sub-questions. And in that paragraph, you might also explain some terms or something in more detail there. But this method puts the research question really up front, right after the first page of introduction. Then, right away after you say the research question, we're interested in hearing what the scientific and social significance of the research question is. So why is this an important issue in science? Perhaps it's a topic that has been widely addressed in other Southeast Asian countries, but yet not in Thailand. So you're filling a gap. Perhaps there's some kind of a puzzle that needs scientific inquiry. But another paragraph needs to be, why is this question that you want to do research in? Why is it socially significant? how is this going to impact Thailand, for example? This is very important for funding agencies to also read. This was really something that has become very important. Peter mentioned funding through NWO, and we're always asked when we make research proposals, what is the social significance of this research? Next part is having one or two paragraphs. One or two paragraphs on the methodology. Are you going to, for example, be conducting interviews? Are you going to be doing spatial mapping? Are you going to do focus groups? Is it a single case study or is it comparative work? So just briefly, how are you going to answer the research question? What's your methodology? Then you step back and give a theoretical overview and discuss a literature of what's already known about the topic. That should be about 3 pages. That's followed then by a deeper discussion of how you're going to conduct your analysis. So you're combining ideas, concepts from your theoretical section with what you wrote about your methodology, and you talk about, well, what kinds of people do you want to conduct interviews with, or what kind of surveys, or what kind of analysis of documents, and finally, conclusion. So that will give you a very organized structure for your research proposal, and it's in the categories that a scientist is looking for when they are evaluating your proposal. Okay, next slide, please. It's important to consider linking your research to current major scientific policy or societal agendas. For example, in my own work, I'm very interested in the Sustainable Development Goals. You know that there are 17 goals, and Thailand, for example, has goals and targets and indicators for these 17 goals. Some of these are social goals like no poverty, no hunger, equality. Other ones have to do with economic growth, and other ones on the environment and climate. The world obviously also has a lot of focus right now on climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. So those are areas that you can pick up on the public debates, societal debates, and see how your research might contribute to furthering that debate. I also urge you to think about comparative research. And oftentimes I recommend that you look within the region. So one of my PhD candidates, Isti Hidiati, she was looking at transport links in informal settlements in Bangkok, and then she compared Jakarta, and she compared that to Kuala Lumpur, which has a little better public transport and rail network. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here are the 17 goals. In my own Faculty of Spatial Sciences, a lot of focus on SDG 11 there, sustainable cities and communities, but then we link this with other goals here. Okay, next slide, please. You know, this is an example in this picture of trying to link kind of scientific inquiry. So in the top line, you see research on climate or the environment or economic development, and how that debate is influencing ideas for cities and sustainable development, sustainable cities. And then you see the societal aspirations below, this idea of poverty reduction, food security, access to water. So more and more, there's emphasis on this link between the scientific debate and the societal debate. So think about that when you're proposing a research. Okay, next slide, please. You know, this is a picture that I use to emphasize that, you know, we want to have research that is impactful on people's lives. These children hopefully have a long life ahead of them. So they are, you know, now interested in hopefully school and that they have fresh water to drink, but they have a long life ahead of them. So we are also responsible for thinking about what's coming in the future. And it's also, if you look in the background there is a large satellite dish, presumably picking up TV signals. So you see, even in what you might think of as a remote village, they're connected to the world. And I think that's important for us to realize that we are all in this together. And we need to think about how our research impacts also the most vulnerable in our societies. Next slide, please. I wanted to show this to you. This was a recent book that I edited with one of my colleagues from Indonesia, Dafri Agusalam. It has contributions from professors from across Southeast Asia and also from a professor at Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. So you see our interest in sustainable development goals in Southeast Asia and ASEAN. Next slide, please. This was also a book that we published last year. This was with PhD research. So this was oftentimes their first article that they published as part of 4 articles for the PhD. And this one then about challenges of governance. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. So once again, this is the University of Groningen. You see all the bikes. It's a wonderful town of about 200,000 people, 50,000 students, very student city. We get around on our bikes. All right, next slide. Just to show you a little bit of life during the summer when everybody's in t-shirts. Okay, and next slide. And an evening picture with the canal on Groningen. So gives you a little bit of flavor for Dutch cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Holzhacker, for that very interesting and presentation, but also just for the very practical advice that you offered on sort of preparing your PhD research proposal. And I think when I looked, I think it was your second or third slide, that I think much of that advice would apply to even a postdoc researcher who's looking for an opportunity or looking for research partners. You know, because a question that I have, I think it relates to some of what you discussed earlier, and that is that, you know, many of the bilateral schemes, bi-regional funding schemes, you know, you need multiple partners to be eligible for. I'm talking about the research schemes, not PhD. And for example, there's a program called the Southeast Asia Europe Joint Funding Scheme for Research and Innovation. For the participants today, we'll send you information on this, but I wanted to mention that because this is basically a bi-regional program between Southeast Asia and Europe. There are about 23 funding agencies participating in this scheme from Europe and Southeast Asia, and one of those funding agencies is NWO from the Netherlands. There have been 7 calls. This scheme started in 2017. There have been 7 calls since the launch of that program The seventh call has just closed and is being evaluated now, which was on sort of climate, sustainable food production, climate change. That is, as I say, being evaluated now. There'll be an eighth call, presumably in the next 5-6 months. So just, first of all, letting you know about that scheme. We'll include information on that in the follow-up. But, what we often find, we get questions from researchers saying, well, I'm sitting, and particularly, during COVID when people can't travel, I'm sitting here in Thailand. I'm a young researcher. I haven't built my international network. How do I go about finding, say, a partner in the Netherlands? So a question for you, and I think you've partly answered it with the PhD slides you had, but what would be your advice to a young researcher who thinks for whatever reason they might want to cooperate with the Netherlands, but they don't yet have a partner identified? What would be, say, the first three, 4 steps that you would suggest taking to find that partner?
Let me start with, you mentioned that the seventh funding proposals are currently being evaluated, but that means then that perhaps 6 to 9 months from now, that those universities involved will be recruiting PhDs and postdocs as part of those programs. So you mentioned that they will focus on food production and climate. The other part of this, I think, is when people are reading journal articles, when they're writing their proposals, look for those Dutch professors that are writing currently about topics that are related to them, and then when they write to that professor, then mention how interested that you are in their research and their topic, and see what. Then you're also a little bit ahead of the curve. So maybe there hasn't yet been a research proposal formally submitted, but then they are aware of your interest and your background. Most of our PhD candidates at the, say, ASEAN Center then have had national funding. So it's also very important to think about how their own nations fall will, how their work is part of those priorities and important to the country itself.
One more related question. So about sort of seeing who's active, who's publishing, who's active in your field. But then what young researchers often say is, yeah, but I don't feel comfortable approaching somebody, writing to somebody that I've never met before. Yes, I need to see their name in the journal. Can you just comment on that about sort of approaching somebody that you've never met before, that is probably quite a bit more senior than you are? And clearly they're publishing, they're active, they could be a good partner. Just can you comment on that? Your advice maybe on that topic?
Yes, I mean, I get proposals every couple weeks from students, and I think what I said there about also making sure that you write a very precise paragraph about what your research is going to be about, and of course, part of this is then to see how. As to be open to different methodologies and approaches that the supervisory team might suggest. So showing, yes, you have certain things in mind, but that you also want to learn from the perspective of that particular professor or team, I think is important.
Thank you. Maybe we can come back to some of this in the discussion later on, but perhaps now we can hear from a Thai colleague who, in fact, did a dual PhD in the Netherlands. She got her PhD from Erasmus University as well as from King Mongkut University, KMIT, King Mongkut Institute of Technology, La Krabang.
Yes,
here in Bangkok.
Correct.
So she's got a dual degree and spent a significant amount of time in the Netherlands. So let's hear from Ajahn Siriwan Rujibhong, who's Dean of the Graduate School at Bangkok University, and she will give us some, we'll just basically share her experience on her time in the Netherlands. So Ajahn Siriwan, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Can you all hear me well, right?
Very well. Very good.
Right. Great. So please allow me to share my screen. This will be just a second. Okay. Oh. Sorry. We'll go to the slide number 1. Okay, so good afternoon, guys, and thank you for having me here this afternoon and allow me to share my experience in the Netherlands with you guys. And today I'm gonna cover 3 topics, 3 big questions. Why did I choose the Netherlands to pursue my doctoral degree, and life in the Netherlands, and also a little bit of a suggestion and tips after that. And first, please allow me to introduce myself again. My name is Siriwan Rujibhong, and I am working with Bangkok University as a dean and director of the master degree in architectural program. Okay. I graduated from the Erasmus University Rotterdam in 2017 in the Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies, or IHS we call. And also the dual degree with the King Mongkut Institute of Technology, Lat Krabang, and Doctor of Architecture, and in the multidisciplinary design research. So the first topic that I will cover, why the Netherlands. Firstly, based on my point of view, I think the Netherlands has a high quality of education system, of course. And some of you may know, some of you may not know that the Netherlands is ranking in the top 4 of the world's best country for the education system in 2020, and also many university in the Netherlands is ranking in top 20. Another most important reason is that the Netherlands is one of the countries that used English as a second language, and I think maybe more than 80% or 90% that locals people can speak English and understand English quite well, and I don't have any worries about communication with people in the Netherlands. Never. And also, I love the way that Dutch people, they create their own business. There are many famous, world famous companies founded in the Netherlands. So this kind of like the ecosystem that I think it will be good and great for my PhD study. And the second reason is because of wide range of research fields of the Netherlands. As Peter mentioned earlier, that there are 14 research universities in the Netherlands, and in my field, because I have a background in interior architecture and construction management, and my dissertation topic is about urban psychology. So of course, the Netherlands is the very first country that can reflect that capacity of manage their urban quite well. So at the end, I decided to pursue my doctoral degree with IHS, Institute for Housing and Urban Development Studies at Erasmus University, Rotterdam. Also, I think that Erasmus University got a very beautiful campus. Um, as you can see here in the picture, the atmosphere is quite good. Simple, natural atmosphere you can find there. And at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam, they are very famous in School of Management and also Business and Social Science as well. And their campus is quite huge and close to the city center, so I think it's convenient to me to live there. And then I really like Rotterdam because it's quite a new city to me. After Second World War, 80% of the city was rebuilt due to the impact of the World War. So Rotterdam is quite like a playground for the architects to design and build the remarkable buildings over there. And the city itself is very beautiful. Of course, I chose the Netherlands because of the I feel safe and I feel convenient based on my experience over there. We have many options of public transports. You can use tram, you can use train, bicycle, or you can also walk from your apartment to school, but it might takes a lot of energy for walking. So I mostly chose cycling, ride the bicycle to my school. And also, and here is the Delft train station. It's very convenient that I can travel from Rotterdam to Delft within 15 minutes. I can travel from Rotterdam to Amsterdam in 45 minutes. The train is in a good shape and clean, and the platform is safe, and most of people they choose to use public transportation system to travel around. And also I can go to France, I can go to Belgium with the international train like Thalys. This is Utrecht Central Station. And also it's bike friendly. For the traveler who don't want to be separated from your bicycle, you can choose the option to bring your own bicycle, but not in a rush hour. Maybe after 9:30, you can bring your own bicycle into the train. Okay, and then life in the Netherlands. During my first days in the Netherlands, I think that the thing that I have to change my way of thinking is that I have to be more participated, and at IHS we have many colleagues from around the world, so I can feel the international atmosphere there. At the IHS, I have a friend from around the world, but before I was like an introvert person, but after studying in the Netherlands, I think it changed me a bit, that I become more open-minded and tolerate for the comments and things like that. But it's a good experience, and I think it's give me more opportunity. And as well, life in the Netherlands, I've earned a lot of opportunities to express myself. During my PhD time, I earned opportunities to travel around EU countries to present my research results. and it's cheaper to go from the Netherlands to France, to Spain, and even to the UK. It took cheaper budget. And also in the Netherlands, I think you can raise your voice, and your voice will always be responded. Like in the picture you can see over here. And what else? Yes, you have to live sustainably, I think. Before I went to the Netherlands, my cycling skill was quite poor. But after after moving and spending time there, I changed my perspective, and I think that cycling or riding bicycle to everywhere, it's good for your health, and cheaper and more sustainable, I think. And of course, you have to making new friends. You have to make a new friends. And at the IHS, like I mentioned earlier, that I have friends, colleagues from around the world, from Egypt, from Indonesia, from China, from UK, from Nigeria, Portugal. So you can see that my network, it's quite wide before than before. And I think that I make the right decision that choose Netherlands as my PhD degree. And this is some of pictures from my commencement day. And yeah, I think it's a road to success for me. And okay, so for the suggestion, for those who are interested in studying in the Netherlands, I think first thing, you have to focus on your research, and let your proposal guide you to the place that you want to go. I think from my experience, it will be better if you stay independent, and because most of the time of my PhD journey, I spend time with myself and to think about many things, and try to think systematically, because it will affect your writing, your manuscript as well. And just enjoy and respect each other's differences, I think would be three keys that I could suggest for now. So thank you so much, and good luck with your proposal.
That's great. Thank you, Jan Siriwan. What a great presentation.
Thank you.
Makes me want to go to the Netherlands, I think.
Okay.
So I mean, I think what came through very clearly is it's not just the high quality of research, but it's the life you lead when you're there, and also importantly the effect it had on you in terms of your own sort of personal development. You know, different ways of thinking, the international exposure, and so on. So can I just, and forgive me if I missed this, but what I mean, you've shown very well here why it was a great experience, but why did you choose the Netherlands to begin with? Or how did you come to choose the Netherlands as your PhD destination?
I think I talk a little bit about my proposal. My dissertation topic is quite in the field of urban psychology. So I also use the Neso Nuffic information sources, and I search which university that offer the PhD program in this field, and then I went through a little bit deeper into the professor list and his and her publications, and I make a final list maybe 3 to 5 institutes, and I sent email to them, and I got some responses. Um, Mostly they're quite positive with my proposal, and at the end I choose the IHS because of the I think they are great in urban study and urban development, and because of their international images, I think. So I think I will earn a lot more experience with IHS. So that's why I selected IHS as my host. And of course, they offer me a better deal as well, because at first I offered to be a visiting scholars, but at the end, professor, my promoter, he offered a dual degree program. So it's become a bilateral agreement between KMITL and IHS. Just my case only. But if you want to do a customized study plan like this, I think you can try and show them your potential to finish your research on time, I think.
So you, if I understand correctly, you had a pretty clear idea of what research you wanted to undertake, and you looked at different places that offered that. And when you contacted Erasmus, so you had no prior connection with them. You just knew
No.
that you knew that they were strong in your field.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, why I'm asking, I think it just sort of, to me, I mean, it's highlighting, the fact that you don't need to have prior connections necessarily, and that obviously when you wrote to them, they were interested to hear from you, because you're obviously good in your field and you're working in a similar area or an area that they have as a priority. So I think that's to me, that's important advice, not just for young, sort of young PhD candidates, but also postdocs, et cetera, that you can contact professors, research institute directors, et cetera, without necessarily knowing them beforehand.
It's not necessary to my point of view, because the thing that I've done is I do the finalist, so it will be more than one institute that I contacted. So maybe if you have never known anyone there, I think you can try with this method first, and if you got some more response, which mean I think it's mean that you're a success. You got your first step already.
Peter, did you want to make any comments before we move to some questions here that come from the participants?
Thank you. No, first, I want to really thank Siriwan for, I think it's a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Peter.
Very lively. And no, I can only confirm. I mean, people are judged at their own merits. And in many ways, PhD research positions, as I said, are filled by, it's almost comparable to open recruitment. So professors are interested to talk to interesting candidates, wherever they come from, as long as they show the right attitude and have the right background and so on. There can be a conversation. It's not very rigid in that sense. So I think that's a nice reflection by Siriwan on her experience. So thanks.
Professor Holzhacker, any comments from you about what we've been, Jen Siriwan's presentation and what we've been discussing?
That really was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you,
It makes
Professor.
me ready for summer and all the green grass and trees. And I'm so glad you had such a wonderful time here in the Netherlands. I think the Dutch society in general is rather horizontal. So this access, a lot of times our postdocs and PhDs are surprised at the kind of ready access that they have to professors. We're normally called by our first names. And, you know, our office doors are open. So we're seeing the PhD candidates and the postdocs, you know, every day. And then have more formal meetings every few weeks. So there's it's a very collaborative and open, and I think that's really what your presentation also emphasized. And also this peer group, and there's a lot of activities that really try to make this a group. And then, you know, when you're have a question for a colleague then that's working on a similar issue in the Philippines or Indonesia, then, you know, you have a ready contact and peer group. I think that's very important for science and for personal well-being. So wonderful.
This leads me to a couple of questions here that have come in. One is, and I realize this will be very difficult to answer given the uncertainties of the current pandemic and so on. But I mean, is it possible are you taking in PhD candidates who will work at least remotely initially, or how are you dealing with the COVID situation in terms of new PhD candidates coming in?
Can I start answering that? I mean,
Yes,
Ronald,
sorry,
can
Peter.
we
Yeah.
share something from Groningen University? There is no prior obstacles, or, you know, as I said, starting with the visa, there is rather an accommodation of the fact that students and researchers still need visa, even at times that the travel restrictions need to be more tighter. The emphasis in the whole education system is certainly at the moment to keep it open as much as possible, as much as responsible. That is true for MA students, but also for research and researchers. So people in principle are welcome. There has been no delay or stop on funding PhD or research projects. So under the circumstances, there are, of course, as I said, COVID comes and goes a bit in waves, right? There are periods that restrictions need to be more tighter than other periods. That's a lesson learned from the past 2 years. But there are no prior restrictions to research. So things go on as normal. And to the question, is it possible to start working remotely? You know, a PhD proposal and how you do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It depends, of course, in what kind of field you work. If you are more in the social sciences and you have to start with a desk research, that might be possible. That would be a matter of making an agreement with your promoter. In that sense, there is nothing that, let's say, legally would oblige you to be in the Netherlands. And of course, also from before COVID, there are many forms and angles to do a PhD that will require field research outside the Netherlands. So in that sense, people often spend considerable time in the field, and not surprisingly, that can be research in their home country. Professor Holzhacker was referring to a few examples in his presentation. So that a PhD researcher moves back and forth between the Netherlands and another country or other countries, if that is relevant for the research, is very possible. So, you know, not really a lot of impact from COVID in that sense, other than pragmatically dealing with the situation and what can or cannot be done at a certain point in time at campus. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Another question too for you, Peter, just because I think there may have been a misunderstanding looking at this question, and this concerns the fact that when you get your PhD or you're given a position, a PhD position, you get an employment contract. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't mean, I think what the person is asking here, you don't need to have a job in order to get
No.
No. Yeah,
Yeah.
just
If you start a PhD
that.
research,
Yeah.
you get a job. No, it's
The
just,
PhD is the job.
I am right. I emphasize it because it is different from many other countries.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it just changes the nature of the terms of which you are in the Netherlands. But in a way, you say it normalizes that to some extent. And by the same token, then also, as Ron said, which is relevant for many PhD researchers, you can bring your family.
Another question here is, this person is saying, I'm already a PhD student in the Netherlands, supported by a scholarship, but they've also learned while being in the Netherlands that there are a number of PhD students who are being supported by company scholarships. Now, would those be available to candidates from outside of the Netherlands in your experience? I'm sure it's, case by case, but or to some extent case by case. But are those company corporate scholarships open to
They can be. There is some of those scholarships are for Dutch students only. Some of those scholarships are granted within the confines of the member states of the European Union. But some of them definitely are also global and are accessible. So that would indeed really be a question of going into the details of the particular scholarship.
Right. Okay. And are there? Are you aware of specific postdoc fellowships targeting Thailand, Southeast Asia? Dutch postdoc fellowships?
To the best of my knowledge, there is not much specifically for Thailand. But Southeast, as I said, Southeast Asia. I think you were also referring to the regional calls by NWO, for example.
Right.
That is definitely, the European Union also has a clear relationship with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations that clearly has a knowledge component to it. So regionally, Southeast Asia, for sure.
And if I could just add to that, there are also this is for the person asking the question here. There are the Marie Sklodowska-Curie Action postdoc fellowships, the Marie Curie postdoc fellowships. The next call for that will open, I think, in April 2022. And those fellowships, which are funded through the European Union, I think two sort of distinguishing features. One is they are bottom up, so you can choose the topic. It covers basically any research field. So you and your host in Europe would decide on the topic. And the second, I guess, distinguishing feature is that you also choose the host. So if you were interested in, for example, going to the University of Groningen, well, you could develop a proposal. You as a Thai postdoc candidate here would develop your proposal with your professor, your colleague at University of Groningen, and on whichever topic that you both sort of agree on and think is worth developing. So that call is coming up in April, and we can include in the follow-up to today's session, we can include some information on the NSCA postdoc fellowships.
Right, sure. Yeah, that's, in my opinion, that's sort of the category of European Union funded opportunities which are out there as well. And as I said, the EU definitely looks at Southeast Asia.
I also wanted to mention that Dutch universities also use internal money within faculties to hire new employees, PhD candidates, and there's international recruitment for those positions. So we want the best people, and the Netherlands, compared to many countries, is very open to making sure that it's international recruitment. Each faculty then periodically has calls for particular positions and timing, and those are also important to look at.
Very good. Unfortunately, I think we're coming to the close of the session. If we want to sort of stay on schedule to some extent. Before closing, though, I would just like to say that today's event, as I mentioned, was was organized as part of the European Research and Innovation Days, ASEAN, which are taking place right now. Could you put up the slide for the research? And for those researchers here in Thailand, PhD candidates, this program will continue until the middle of December. And here's the registration link. So we encourage you to take a look at the schedule because there are a number of events coming up which cover both funding opportunities. There are also dialogue sessions on climate change, on sustainable development, on science diplomacy. And there are also some training workshops coming up. One in science communication, which I think might be very interesting for you, because that also relates to I think Professor Holzhacker's comments earlier about the need to address, what is the impact of your research. And this session, which is on the 13th of December, is doing exactly that. That'll be about a 3-hour session on the 13th. So anyway, all the information is available here through the European Research and Innovation Days, ASEAN. Another comment I'd like or another request, I guess, to the participants is when you sign out today, you will receive a questionnaire feedback form. Please fill it in because we do pay attention to it and it helps us design workshops in the future, sessions like this that meet your needs. So please just give us 5 minutes or so and fill those in. And with that, I think we have to close. But I wanted to thank Peter Van Til and Professor Ronald Holzhacker and Professor Siriwan Rujibhong from Bangkok University, to thank you all for your excellent presentations and for your practical advice and for generating a lot of interest in the Netherlands. So thank you all very much. It was a very enjoyable afternoon. So with that, goodbye to you all, and thank you again.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you,
Thank
Simon.
you, Siriwan. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Take
Ronald.
care.
Thank you, everybody.